Hello, my name is Jackson, and I am the founder and CEO of Italy, a learning app that's kind of like TikTok meets Khan Academy. Thanks for joining, and welcome to Entrepreneur Tips, where we pack our episodes full of entrepreneurial stories and learning. Today, we have Brian Curcio and Myles Gage with us, who are co-founders of Rapunzl Investments. However, in this case, these two are not leading investments themselves, but instead have created a platform so that kids in schools can try their hands at investing in the stock market in a safe, gamified way that teaches them key lessons in financial literacy. Great to have you guys on. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Great. So we actually met because both Italy and Rapunzl were, winning contestants in the Yas Prize for Education. So quick plug for the Yas Prize. We were semifinalists, and you at Rapunzl were both finalists, winning $500,000. So congratulations on that again.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it was. I think that entire accelerator was so fun, and it's like it really is. The connections you make out of it were definitely invaluable.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I definitely took away not only some learnings, but some amazing folks that I was like, I have to get you guys onto this show and talk with you guys. But briefly, what was the first thing that you're like, okay, we've got this money now, we've got to go spend a little bit. What was that first thing that you're like, we're going to spend on this?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing and so that was kind of where I think Myles and I, we do have this saying that we've heard from our main investor that thinking is cheap. And so we took some time. Fortunately, we weren't just immediately writing checks, but we realized soliciting customer feedback, and we kind of have an interesting model where our end users are students, but a lot of times the customer is the teacher who's willing to bring it into the classroom. And using that user feedback, what we kept hearing from teachers was that they really wanted a teacher portal where they were able to monitor students, administer our curriculum in the classroom, align it to state and national standards. And so I think that these past 2 months, we've kind of been head down, refining our full curriculum, building out a teacher portal, and just working with a couple other participants were kind of using them as pilot programs in the fall.
So I guess rather than spending the money, we found ways to partner with other finalists and semifinalists to figure out ways that we can push both of our missions forward.
That's awesome. Yeah, very cool. And it sounds like immediate sort of value from that money. I guess the next thing I wanted to do really quickly as we're getting into this is I would love to learn a little bit more about, both of your journeys. So learn a little bit more about you, Brian and Myles. So can you give us, quick, the 30-second version of, what are your backgrounds before Rapunzl and what led you into sort of the entrepreneurship path?
I'll take it. I think it might be a little bit more than 30 seconds, but
no worries.
Brian and I, we've been friends since freshman year of high school. And what actually drew us together was both our love for financial markets and investing. And we would have heated arguments at our lockers during the last 2008 recession about good investment opportunities. And to that point, we both had internships in high school, working in the world of finance, worked in investment banking and alternative investments. But we came together. Brian did a gap year, and I graduated in 2016. But we just saw a lot of our friends flocking to other platforms to invest because it was becoming more accessible via smartphones. But a lot of our friends and our peers did not understand the basics as it pertains to the stock market or a lot of financial topics in general. So we saw this teachable moment to create the conduit from when someone is curious about the world of investing until the point when they actually do it with their real money. So Rapunzl is that stepping stone, allows people to create simulated stock portfolios and interact with financial markets in a risk-free environment.
That's awesome. Brian, anything on your background that led you to want to start a company like this?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up always thinking about going into banking, and finance fascinated me. And I think that it was really identifying that, and they say like all the best companies come out of identifying a problem and figuring out a solution. And I think that for us, we realized that we had been fortunate enough to receive exposure to the world of investing at a young age. And it's a problem when so many people aren't. And so I think that kind of my early childhood of being exposed to finance, having internships in kind of investment banks, I think that that really led to this idea of trying to create something that kind of levels the playing field and gives everyone access to kind of the world of investing and being able to learn to take control of your finances.
That's awesome. And was there a specific moment when, it sounds like you had these cool conversations about investing back when you guys first met each other, but was there a specific moment when you were like, we should go into business together?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of, there were a mix there. I think the first time we ever talked about it, I was working at a hedge fund in New York. I think Myles had an internship in Chicago, or maybe Myles had a full-time job at that point because it was a year later. But he came out for the weekend, and we just were kind of talking about like the state of affairs of education in Chicago, and then also just how our jobs in finance, it was like, it's just so much what we know compared to the average person, and not even in a gloating way, and much more in a, everyone should know this. And so I think we talked about it then, and that might've been getting our brains going. And then a couple months later, we sat down, and I was like, look, like I've started drawing some ideas of what a better trading app would look like. And that's when we kind of said, well, instead of real trading and seeing the rise of Robinhood, it's like, well, we're not going to beat them. It was like, well, maybe retail trading shouldn't be so easy to get to. Maybe people want to learn before they put their money at risk. And so I think that's really where, Myles and I just sitting around the table was just like, wait a minute, like this is what we need to do.
So you were in the moment together when you were like, this is actually a huge problem space and we could totally work on this together.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really cool. Cool. And I guess, there's definitely a special relationship that comes with co-founders. You guys knew each other before. Have you had any moments where you're like, thank God we knew each other before, before actually going into business together?
Yeah, I think all the time, because it's just that level of familiarity. It's like, I know what makes him tick. He knows what makes me tick. So it's kind of like we know how each other operates as individuals, which I think adds this human aspect, because business is really complicated, and it's not like a friendship where it's just like you're doing fun things. It's like we're really solving a lot of challenging problems. Things are not going the way we want them sometimes. So to be able to do that with someone that you trust and figuring out these complicated problems, I think has made things easier. So I'm glad. I wouldn't want another co-founder than Brian. I think Brian probably would say the same thing. I hope so.
No, I definitely agree. I think it's, whether it's looking for a co-founder or working for founders at a startup or kind of any career, I think that having a strong level of respect with someone is kind of critical, I think, to being successful in any endeavor.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, that's a really cool story, guys. So we can jump now, I guess, into the main, meat and potatoes of this podcast. And the idea is we'll cover 3 to 4 topics. We'll see how we're doing on time. And in those 3 to 4 topics, we're going to go through and talk a little bit about pivoting. What are some of the ways that, you've seen pivots done in the past? Maybe a little bit about Rapunzl and any sort of pivots that may have happened there. We'll talk a little bit about branding. We'll talk a little bit about accelerators. And then if we have some time at the end, we'd love to cover accounting. But first things first, let's talk a little bit about pivoting. So can you explain, conceptually, what it means to pivot, and how does it help to drive success to change up what you're doing?
I think we read a lot of books. I think for us, pivoting is failing quickly. So it's like when you recognize that something isn't working, it's not just staying in that current state, and it's adjusting. Because the question you asked earlier, what did you all do with the money when you got it? We learned a lot. We learned a lot early on about running out of money, and we never want to be in that state again. So we've been really nimble on pivoting when we see that we may be about to waste cash or end up in a crunch.
Awesome. And can you share maybe the case study of like a time when Rapunzl had to pivot? Like, was there like a big pivot? Was there a small pivot? And like, why? What was the moment that you said, this requires a little bit of a change?
Yeah, I think when we first started the platform, we looked at it as kind of a social media layer to go over an existing brokerage platform. And the big pivot, I mean, I think a lot of pivots and the best pivots are probably out of necessity. And we kind of realized that this isn't a sustainable business model. There were a couple other firms trying to do the same thing, and no one was really getting traction. But we kind of, I think, successful founders fall back on what they're comfortable and what they're passionate with, not what they're comfortable, what they're passionate about. And I think both Myles and I were really passionate about helping kids and trying to figure out kind of rectifying some of the historical inequities in financial services. And I think that pivoting towards education helped us find a proven revenue model where we were able to receive support from financial institutions, and also really start growing this teacher portal to kind of reach school districts and improve the way teachers are and kids are learning about financial literacy.
Yeah, very cool. And so this was a process, obviously, that you both went through. Can you share a tip on what was the moment or what was something that you guys decided to do during that pivot that helped it go successfully? Like, it sounds like you knew it was time to pivot because there wasn't traction in this old market. So what were the things that you had to do to be successful in moving to the new market?
Well, first, I would say is communicating as a team and making sure that everyone's on the same page and understanding what's going to take place and the pivot is happening. And then that just goes to the level of respect and trust to be like, okay, let's have this conversation like as a team and like plan it out. So I think being able to identify that and then just being able to come together and think about those next steps, because with any pivot, I mean, Brian being the CEO and running it, he'll call me at whatever hour it may be and just like shoot some ideas. And then I'll say like whether I agree with them or just add my 2 cents. But it's often to make a pivot. So he may have the initial or I may have it, whatever it may be. But then it's just making sure that everyone on the team understands why. And I think if everyone can understand, then it's easier to start to devise the plan on how we're going to move forward.
Awesome. Anything to add to that, Brian?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that the biggest thing with a pivot is like not trying to rush it. I think that a lot of times when you're pivoting, you're kind of panicking and thinking like, okay, this isn't working, we need something else. And I think one of the things we did really well was kind of like looking at it as just like, look, it didn't work. Like, or right now we have a couple things we're trying and it's like, look, like it's not working so far. We said we're going to try till the end of March. Like, let's talk about it end of March, and then we'll see if we continue doing it that way. So I think it's trying to run these small tests and not necessarily getting emotionally invested into, it's kind of how the how doesn't necessarily matter as long as you're trying to achieve a good why. And so it's kind of like, look, we want to improve financial education. If we had to pivot, we thought we would be in colleges and colleges didn't want us. It's like, okay, we'll go to high schools. And then we found out that there's actually a big need in middle school. And so it's kind of pivoting where the market opportunity is, kind of helps you achieve kind of continuing to get that dream and that ultimate vision.
Right.
Because the colleges will come around eventually. We'll get them.
Yeah, exactly. Very cool. Yeah, I love that story. Cool. So, any last thoughts on pivots before we move on?
No, I think we can pivot.
Let's pivot. Pivot. I was like looking up memes on pivots the other day, and there's that like Friends episode from God knows when, but like they're carrying a couch up like the stairs and like pivot, pivot. Unfortunately, no like entrepreneurship pivot memes, just that one. So if anyone out there wants to make some entrepreneurship pivot memes, please contact me. But yeah, so let's dive into our next subject area. So I wanted to talk a little bit about branding. And I was, checking out your website before this, definitely got, the feel, got the green, the money feel, but, and a lot of people have heard of, sales or marketing, but like, what is branding? It maybe feels a little fluffy, and how is it different from like a marketing?
Yeah, I mean, I think branding, and I'll let Myles tell the story, but just to set the answer up, I mean, I think branding is very much about like, what do you want to leave people feeling when they think about your company? I think it's kind of this idea of when people see the name, like what comes to mind from it. And so like, sure, the color green helps because you're thinking about money. We wanted the castle there, kind of ties to the story, but also the story of Rapunzl, but it also kind of signifies security and this idea that there's no risk in that there's simulated competitions. And I think most importantly, I mean, like having as an early startup, like we didn't want to come up with a word and then try to it's hard enough explaining to people that we dropped the E. It's even harder to explain that Rapunzel isn't spelled with an I. But I think now it's really fun when you type Google and you Rapunzl without the E and it doesn't autocorrect it. It's like, so over time, you kind of start building a brand there. And the brand message we were always trying to get across, which I'll let Myles tell, kind of aligns exactly with what we're trying to do.
So, right. And so that's the kind of the perfect segue. And so, I mean, the Rapunzl name stems from the fact that people often view the world of investing and the returns of Wall Street as something that's inaccessible to most people. So we're essentially rolling down the hair to provide equitable access to financial markets. And that essentially is the mission of the company. I think that's Brian and I's personal missions too. So even beyond when I think about work, life outside of work, it's pretty much work, but it's pretty much all encompassing. So everything that we do is kind of a reflection of our underlying mission, which is to help others achieve financial success. So even as far as like the interactions that we have with people in our daily lives, it's like helping them with whatever their business ideas may be. I know Brian picks up some side projects to help people, and then I also help folks navigate like the landscape of interning or connecting them with jobs. So it's just like all encompassing. And then I think that even segues to some of the other programs that we do, because we work directly with banks and financial services firms, and we also work with kids. So we had the idea of, why don't we just start a summer camp and connect the students that we're working with some of these financial services firms? Because if there's such a need with helping students from like underserved communities, it's like, we know that it is relationship based and we know all these people, so let's pair them. So that's not something that we necessarily have to do. I mean, it definitely helps with the bottom line to be able to get paid for it, but kids aren't doing anything during the summer. And we were like, well, this is something to help them and address some challenges that they may face, and also allow them to start networking too. So I think branding is super important, and it spans beyond just having a green logo and us wearing green every day too. It's just really us.
And green socks. So I've got a
can't forget the socks.
Bull costume. We went bull riding. We got lots of all
Love
money in finance.
Yeah,
that's fantastic. But it's really, one of the things that I noticed as you were speaking, Myles, was that some of the things you said, we could have been talking about mission as much as we were talking about branding. Mm-hmm. It seems like you found a good way to tie mission and branding together, which is really cool.
Absolutely.
Great. So one of the questions that I have is like, for an entrepreneur who's just starting out, let's say, I'm building a new business. How important is branding? Like, are there any tips that you would have as I'm just starting out to think about branding? Like, how much time should I spend on it? How important is it? Those sort of questions.
I think beyond branding, the biggest thing is having the story, because I think with the story that helps create the brand.
I mean, I think the full transparency, like we came up with Rapunzl as like hey, why don't you just call it Rapunzl? And then Myles backed into a metaphor, and it was like, that's a great metaphor. The logo itself, I designed using about 500 little squares in a Microsoft PowerPoint slide at
No way.
We now have an Illustrator version. But I think that as long as it's like you continue doing good things as a company, the brand awareness will follow. And kind of doing just as you become more familiar with people, like no one thinks of Amazon as selling books anymore.
Yeah, I love that. Like all of these things could stem from a story, right? It's like the Rapunzl imagery stems from the story. The like financial access stems from the story, and then it kind of informs some of the other things that you think of as, the designy part of brand or the mission part of brand. So I think that's really cool. Awesome. So I guess one of my next questions is about that sort of design part of brand. When you're thinking about, the first logo, or maybe you're thinking about like how to create your website, like at what point does it make sense to, hire someone outside? Like when should a new entrepreneur think about doing these things? And how many iterations have you gone through in your sort of design brand side?
I would say that the entrepreneur should learn Photoshop. I think that there's so many things along the way in business that knowing Photoshop and not having to rely on an outsourced person is a huge time and money saver. I'm a little personally biased because I built our company's website, but I do know that it's even like a 2-3 week tutorial and you build like a gorgeous website doing that I feel like I think the biggest thing is getting your product out there, getting feedback from users, figuring out what people think about it, that people aren't going to fall in love with your product because you have a gorgeous website. I think that kind of, and I think a lot of people like to put the carriage in front of the horse with a lot of the things that they try and do of like make it look like you're successful and measure yourself on metrics that aren't necessarily impacting your bottom line.
And I think we can speak from that personally, because like aesthetically we had everything near and we're like, why isn't this selling itself? But again, you still have to find your customers and introduce the product to them, because otherwise they wouldn't even know to go to your website. But it's good once you kind of have that captivated audience that they're able to go to a website or see a logo, and then it creates some like familiarity, or they're able to associate a logo or color scheme with this product or service that you're offering.
Yeah, no, that makes 100% sense. As someone who built sort of our own website as well, I think it is a super valuable skill to have so that you don't have to be paying, $2,000 first thing as you're just getting up and running. Excellent. All right. I think time to move to the next topic area. So next area, let's accelerate on to accelerators. So a lot of people have heard of accelerators, but there are, many different types. Is there a common definition for an accelerator that you think of? And, what differentiates the different accelerators?
I can't say that we've been in many accelerators beyond that YAS accelerator, but from what we've heard from different founders, and Myles, if you've heard otherwise or different stories, feel free to jump in. But I think what we've heard, Y Combinator is a big one. GSV Labs is a big one. And I think the biggest differences between some of these, they all market that they have incredible networks. Some have bigger networks than others. I think some, the cachet has been undermined because at the end of the day, a lot of these accelerators are for-profit entities. And so they're trying to have people come through. But the biggest difference,
brand.
and the biggest things to think through, I think, would be kind of, what is the network you're buying? What is the cachet of being in that accelerator? What could you really learn from the accelerator? And then, like, kind of most importantly, like, how much do they want for it? With a lot of these accelerators taking an equity stake or for an investment, is that necessarily what you would like to do with your company?
Yeah, I think, just kind of build on Brian's point. It just makes sense to do all your research about the accelerator and like not just applying haphazardly just to say you're a part of accelerator, but it should make sense because, so you mentioned it, it's a time commitment, it can be a cost commitment too. And you may do it and then not actually get anything from it. So it has to make sense. And again, the most, I guess, precious thing with business is time, for sure. So it's like you don't want to waste it, and it should all be leading you to some destination.
100%. So let's talk a little bit about our common shared experience, which was the accelerator that we went through together. So do you want to give a little bit of an overview of everything we did for the Ask Prize and maybe give that sort of case study of Rapunzl going through the Ask Prize?
Yeah. So, I mean, we flew down and we spent 4 days in Miami interacting with the other two, or with all the other semifinalists. There were 32 semifinalists and then some additional members from people's teams. And during that time, we met with a ton of incredible leaders, ranging from public speaking coaches to politicians, kind of just getting insights into how to transform education, how to kind of create sustainable models and really produce outstanding outcomes for students through kind of permissionless learning. And that's why kind of the whole program was part of the STOP Awards, which that's the acronym, Sustainability, Transformational, Outstanding, and Permissionless. But and during that time, it was incredible. It was, the networking opportunity was crazy. It was definitely nerve-wracking at the end. There was a pitch for $1 million on Thursday, and it was a hard-capped 3 minutes. And I mean, I think accelerators like that, where it's, hey, there's an opportunity to win money. I mean, like, you have to be a fool to turn down free money and free knowledge, I think.
So a lot of folks would want to understand, like, okay, that sounds amazing. What were the things that you did to, one, get started discovering some of these accelerators? And, what were the tips you would have for folks applying when they are finding something they want to be a part of and applying to that accelerator?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say true to yourself with your application, and like, obviously don't lie, like tell your story as authentic as you can. In terms of searching for accelerators, can't be helpful. This was the first and the only, and the way we found out about it was 2 days before the deadline. So we're feeling really thrilled that it came across our desk.
Oh, Myles, I think you might be muted.
Yeah, I was muted. But anyway, the other thing that I would say is identify recipients of either a grant or participants in the accelerator and try reaching out to them to connect, because oftentimes a lot of these entrepreneurs and founders have LinkedIn pages and they're not that difficult to really get a hold of, but definitely pick their brains and ask them more about what aspects did they include in their application to make them a more compelling applicant.
Awesome. If you had to go through the process again, like, what's one thing you might have done differently to get more out of the accelerator program?
I'm not sure. It'd probably not come back from New Zealand and be jet lagged for it. So it would have been nice to be a little more awake during. it. But I think I definitely tried to speak to everyone there. There were a few people I missed. So it's like trying to just make the most of the experience and talk and not feel nervous asking questions because everyone there was there to help us, I think.
I definitely think you were one of the first people who reached out to me to like have a conversation and get connected. Were there any favorite conversations besides the one we had, obviously, with some of the other members of the cohort?
There were a bunch of the schools that we connected with where they'll be adopting kind of the Rapunzl program there. So that's where I think one of the greatest parts of being part of this family is that each year we're going to get connected with additional incredible educators and school groups, public, private, charter, that I think it's going to be a great way for us to continue kind of achieving our goal.
Yeah, that's definitely a tip. Definitely try to find an accelerator where the folks who are involved in the accelerator have some sort of common goal, whether they're potential customers or partners. Yeah, fantastic. So let's keep on moving right along. The kind of last area I wanted to go is to spend a little bit of time talking about kind of a maybe unsexy topic, but let's talk a little bit about accounting. So it's an area that may not be, the core business area of most businesses, but generally, what does it do for a business and why is it important to get accounting right?
Well, it provides peace of mind. I'll tell you that at the very least. And it's just organization. I mean, it's just, you gotta have all your numbers and all your financials in order, just especially if you're raising money for a business and a potential investor may want to look at your books. And if you can't get them to them efficiently, that may leave a sour taste in their mouths. And that's just like a high level. But at the very least, it allows you to know how much money you have, how much money's coming in, how much is going out. So accounting has to be in order, and especially when it comes to filing taxes. And in the early stages of Rapunzl, Brian and I thought that we could file our business taxes, but we didn't really know exactly what we were doing. And we worked with an outsourced accounting firm, and we thought they knew what they were doing, and they ended up filing our taxes late. But luckily, we ended up rectifying the issue, and the fine that we got from the IRS, it was we ended up not having to pay it. So all worked out.
Oh wow,
but
what a story!
Yeah, so hire good accountants. Yeah. That would be it's not something to skimp on.
No.
Did you end up switching your end up switching your accounting firm after that?
Right away.
Immediately.
So obviously this became important to you. How did you find a good accounting firm after that? Like, what was the process like?
My brother graduated with a master's in accounting 1 month prior. So it was kind of keeping it in the family.
In the pandemic at that too. So it was a great opportunity for us.
That's some perfect timing. He joined a firm then, yeah?
Yeah, exactly.
That is picture perfect. Do you want to give his firm a shout out on the show?
Yeah, no, he joined us. He joined us.
He literally joined you at. Got it. I got the wires crossed there. That's awesome. So he is your CFO now.
Yep. So he handles all the money.
Which, it's an interesting proposition because there's the real money, and then I'm sure he also does some handling of the fake money too.
Yeah, exactly.
Fantastic. So if you were, starting over again, and maybe you didn't have a brother who's working in accounting, any tips for folks out there who are just getting started?
I think it's really word of mouth and trying to find other entrepreneurs in the area or other advisors, and kind of leaning on them. It's like, I don't think we've ever kind of Googled for an accounting firm. It's always kind of been like getting it from someone that we've met and mentioning, hey, we have an advisor. So just being open with the relationships you have to kind of, you never know who they may know.
Right. And they're also accountants that specifically just work with startups. So when you may be Googling an accounting firm, they may be for companies that are larger or more established than yours. So you're not getting the priority, which happens a lot too. So I think that's something that can be taken advantage of in various incubators or accelerator programs. If you participate in them, they often pair participants with accountants or can provide recommendations.
Great tip. Love it. Great. Well, thank you so much, guys, for taking us through all of these different topic areas. Really, loved the learnings that we got across a variety of areas from, accounting to, branding. I think it was a fascinating conversation. The last thing that I wanted to do with you guys was to, I think before the show, I asked you guys to think a little bit about an entrepreneurship quote. You shared one of them earlier. I think you've got a second one ready for us, Brian. Can you share it with us?
Oh, the thinking is cheap. And once you, we heard this from our main investor, actually. He told us that thinking is cheap. He's like, once you start doing the wrong thing, that's when you lose all your money. So Myles and I definitely read a lot and constantly make sure that the course we want to go down is the right course before kind of spending money and investing resources into it.
Right.
Love it. You shared one other quote with me, which was, I guess, hire slow and fire fast. Can you talk a little bit about what that means and why it's important, maybe especially right now with everything that's going on in tech?
Yeah, I think that there's kind of just this. There's when you need someone and you're kind of I need help. I need someone to join, fix this problem at the company. There's an urgency where you're I need to fill the position as soon as possible, but some of our worst hires have definitely been ones we made out of desperation. And then similarly, some of our worst experiences have been when it's clear by day 2, someone's not going to work out, but you wait 2-3 months because hey, they're figuring it out. And it's you're doing them a disservice because they're not right for it. It's not working for their career, but you're also kind of draining resources you could be spending elsewhere, just time and emotional energy and kind of the finances of their kind of salary as they're working with you.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's a couple of CEOs out there in tech startup world who may have hired a little bit too quickly and not been thinking about the consequences of what that might have done.
No kidding.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you guys so much for being on. Any last thoughts before we wrap up here?
I don't think so. Myles?
If you're watching this, make sure you check out the Yas Prize, because if you're doing something transformative in education, it may be a great resource and network for you.
That is a fantastic shout out. Shout out to everyone over at the Yas Prize. We've loved being a part of this cohort, and you can tell that we've made some excellent connections through it. Fantastic. Well, thanks so much, guys, for coming on and sharing your insights on pivoting, branding, accelerators, accounting, and more. So at some point, we hope to chop this recording up and feature your answers in those topic areas. So if you're listening to this and just want to listen to the branding part again, for example, you'll be able to go into Edely and hopefully find those lessons under that branding section. It was such a pleasure to catch up a little bit, have you on the show. And this concludes the video cast for today. Hope everyone enjoyed it. And until next time, see you later.
Awesome. Sounds good. See you later. See you around.